I'm Danny, that witch next door, and you're listening to That Witch Podcast. Hi, neighbor. Welcome to another episode of That Witch Podcast. I'm Danny, and I am that witch next door, and I am going to be your host and your guide and your mentor in all things magic, witchcraft, astrology, and witchy business. And we are getting into a really fascinating and a really popular branch of astrology today. And it's one that I personally am very happy is so popular because we've really seen this big rising trend of generational healing in many circles throughout the world, all across social media. It's very, very, very popular right now. And this is happening, obviously, within the spiritual community and the spiritual industry, but it's also happening in all kinds of communities and industries outside of the spiritual. So it's really everywhere. And I could get into why I think that, and maybe we'll still kind of talk a little bit about that today. But I want to make sure that this is informative, not just reflective on my part. I want this to be very informative for you so that you feel prepared today to kind of go do your own exploration with this. My biggest goal with this episode is to help you feel like you really can go study and explore this more for yourself because it is wildly helpful. It's wildly helpful astrological work. So, first and foremost, let's talk about what generational healing is. Let's talk about a couple of buzz terms you've probably seen and potentially used yourself. I know that I have. Generational patterns, generational curses, generational trauma, and then that big one, generational healing. And all of these are very broad umbrella concepts. None of them are this super specific, concrete practice in and of themselves. Okay, they're all different kinds of experiences, behaviors, practices, beliefs that fall under each and every one of these. And they can branch into one another as well. Generational patterns refers to the behaviors and beliefs and practices passed down from generation to generation. We most often, when we're talking about generational fill in the blank, anything, most often, most of us are referring to, or what we think of, is within our own lineage and within our own families. And very often this is true and accurate to what we're talking about. I also want to point out that when we do talk about generational patterns, generational trauma that gets passed down from generation to generation, and generational healing that can also be catalyzed as well and passed down generation to generation, this doesn't only happen within the home. This doesn't only happen within the family. We have to remember this. It's a really big point, and that's why I want to bring it up at the beginning of the episode. I'm going to be really blunt. You are not fucking exempt from this work just because you choose not to have children or procreate. That's okay. That is, I am so grateful that we live in a time where that is becoming more and more and more of an autonomous decision. It's not 100% an autonomous decision everywhere, but it is becoming more and more and more than it ever was throughout history. And I'm so grateful for that. And generational trauma does not only fucking occur in families. So even if you choose not to have children, you are not automatically exempt. That's what I want to bring up. You are still accountable for your behaviors and how they impact generations to come. Now, you don't have to give a fuck about that. And quite honestly, if you do choose to have children, you don't have to give a fuck about that. That's your choice. We have free will and choice. That's exemplified to us all the time. And we see most of us know somebody very personal to us in our own immediate lives that don't give a fuck about their kids or being a parent. Some of us are products of that. You have to ask yourself. I want you to think about the people in your life, people you might know of or have heard of, anything. It could be personal, it could be outside of that have not had children. And I want you to ask yourself, do their behaviors, are they exempt from being accountable for them? No. They still have the same consequences and damages. They might happen in different ways to different people at different times, but the accountability piece doesn't go away. So I really, really, really find it's important to talk about this because I'm just saying, I have noticed in the people that are choosing not to have children, this cool, I don't have to deal with any of that shit. You do. Sorry, you do. You're still a part of the generational chain, whether you like it or not. You volunteered to incarnate in this life, in this particular generation, between these other generations. We're all interacting with each other. Sorry. We're all part of the collective, my friend. So don't tune out of any of this just because you've chosen not to have children. If that's if you are one of those people, that is not only okay. I also want you to know that you have just as much power and influence and value in the growth and the progress of our generations and generations to come as the rest of us. Some of us just have more direct day-to-day opportunity. That's a nice way to put parenting. So, first and foremost, we know that generational patterns and trauma, these are behaviors and experiences passed down, and it doesn't just have to take place within a family. It can happen all around us from all different kinds of people influencing us. It's important to note this also because a lot of generational trauma and patterns get carried through outside of the home, or they get reinforced outside of the home, like in media, pop culture, societal norms and interactions, and current events and things like that. All of these things impact generational progress. And in this sense, I'm using the term generational progress as a neutral term. I don't necessarily mean the usual like positive spin we put on the word progress. In this particular case, I mean just like the unfolding of the generational timeline to come. Like as generations continue being born and continue dying off, the patterns that emerge, okay? Generational progress. Generational healing, you may have heard of like breaking generational curses, breaking the chain, breaking the pattern. These things are very often catalysts for generational healing because generational patterns infer things that have been passed down and going on for a very, very long time. Then generational breaking, right? Breaking the generational chain. Very often this is the first step. It's like the thing that happens that makes somebody get off of the merry-go-round so that things can even change in the first place. Healing, the integrative part that comes after that, the healing process, the healing journey, that looks different for everyone. That looks different for every generation because everyone's wounds are different, even the ones that get passed down. They manifest themselves differently generation to generation. When we're looking at all of these themes and concepts that we've now kind of started defining a little bit better, where does astrology come into play? How can we use astrology here? This is actually one of my favorite ways to use astrology. I love looking at astrology through a generational scope. First, in the show notes below, you will find links to the Outer Planet episodes. These are old previous episodes, very helpful and informative on the outer planets, which is Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. In each of those episodes, I'll explain a little bit further the characteristics of those planets, how they show up in our charts, what they mean from a generational standpoint. Since we have all of those in the podcast episode library, I'm not going to go into all of that today. We're going to go a little bit further. If you have listened to those before, and it's been a super long time, it might feel really good to go back and re-listen to those either before, or honestly, it would be fine to listen to them right after this episode. This episode might give you some good perspective for that. Same thing goes for if you've never listened to those previous episodes. They're not a prerequisite is all I'm saying. If you want to pause this and go listen to those first that are linked in the show notes, feel free to do that. If you want to hear this episode after learning more about those planets specifically. But you can also listen to it in this order and finish out this episode and go listen to those planetary episodes for the first time right after this, because this will also provide helpful perspective. So I just wanted to point that out. It doesn't matter what order you listen to them into. They should just be informative for each other no matter what. So we're not going to go into all those generational planets today, but first, what we'll do is one way that you can approach generational work through astrology is through family synastry. Synastry is the practice of comparing and contrasting two or more charts with one another. So it's taking, and that can be any two charts. Sometimes that could be the charts of multiple people, which is what we're talking about in family astrology or family synastry. We're looking at, parents compared to each other, siblings compared to each other, parent-child dynamic, multi-generational dynamic. We're looking at a grandparent, a parent, and a child. All of those are forms of synastry. And comparing one's chart with an event, with a specific time, something that happened in a certain place, that is still also synastry because it is just the comparing of multiple charts. So the reason I bring this up is because not everybody has access to their family's charts. And if you are able to, that is amazing. And I want you to be really grateful for it and say a little prayer of gratitude for that you have access to your family and that they're willing to give you that information. If you do not have access to your family and or their charts, that does not mean that you can't explore family astrology or that you can't explore generational astrology through your own personal scope. And one way you can do this is by using your chart against event charts. So going back and looking at the chart for different times throughout your life. You can also do that for times you knew that your family was alive in the rough region that they lived. If you know where your family is from and a period of time that they lived there, you can pick a day and a time and just put in that location to take a look at what the astrology was for that area, what was going on for the collective at that time. It's wildly, wildly informative. No, it's not necessary. You don't look at event charts and go, oh, this means, let's say you were using it to look at your mom. And you don't have access to your mom, or you don't have access to your mom's chart. You wouldn't go back and say, okay, my mom lived in this place during this period of time, so I'm going to pick this date and time. And this can be from before you were born. Keep that in mind. This could be from her childhood, for example. You don't look at that event chart and go, oh, this is who my mom was. You look at that event chart and go, this is what was happening in my mom's world at that time. And that can still provide a lot, as I'm sure you can hopefully infer from just that example, can provide a lot of very, very helpful perspective. We so often think, I see this happen all the time. I feel so bad because it's so common for people not to have access to their family and or their family's charts. And so often they think that that's just an automatic roadblock, so they don't explore any family synastry or you know what I mean? Not even family synastry, but they don't think they can do any kind of generational exploration for themselves. Because they don't have access to their family or their charts. And that's just not the case. There are other ways you can be creative. And speaking of which, going even further than event charts, you can also look up just historical regional charts in general. So if you want to go even broader, if you know where certain parts of your lineage and ancestors come from, where they migrated from, right, where they settled down or laid roots, you can also pull, and you can get a rough date range. You can pick a date and time within that date range for that location, for that region, and take a look. If you know that a part of your family or ancestors lived through a specific historical event, you can look up the dates for that event. And again, put in the date and time and the region where your family lived during that time. If you want to explore this outside of your own personal family, you can still do exactly this that I'm talking about. So let's say you're just interested in kind of exploring more in general about the generations. And quite frankly, with Pluto in retrograde in Capricorn right now, I talked about this on Moon Day yesterday, a lot of us are naturally doing this right now. A lot of us are naturally in this place of what were things like and how are they now and where are we going to go? And you don't have to put that through the scope of your personal history or your family's history. You can look at this at a much more general, broad level and pull the chart again for a specific region during a specific time period. You can compare and contrast charts across the world from each other. You can compare and contrast charts from 50 years apart in the same region. And you can look up future charts. I'm going to give you my little caveat. I'm going to give you my little classic Danny, be careful what you wish for mini lecture. Don't do that if you are the kind of person that is going to overthink every single one of their moves to try and get to a specific point they think they predicted in the future, or try to avoid a specific thing they think they saw in the future. Don't do that. Just don't do that for yourself. If looking into a future chart is going to activate some kind of stress or overthinking, don't do it. I'm serious. It's just not worth it. Sometimes I think it can just be a lot more grounding just to stick with historical charts, because you can look at historical documents, writings from other people during that time period. Again, these things happened. We know that there's a lot more concrete there. And when it comes to the future, it takes practice. It takes a certain kind of practice and a certain kind of grounding to be able to do that fluidly without getting wrapped up in the future. So I just want to put that out there. You're more than welcome to pull and compare and contrast a past chart, a present chart, and a future chart for a specific region. It is fascinating. It's fascinating work. And there's a reason why, it's really, really, really advanced astrologers looking that far into the future, because it really is a practice. And most people probably wouldn't realize this part, but it really is. It's more of a grounding practice. You have to learn how to really set your anchor here and be able to look at that stuff without getting totally swept away by it. So be honest with yourself before you do that, okay? But it can be super fascinating to compare charts of different time periods. So these are just some of the general ways to get started from an astrological modality into generational exploration, okay? Just in a very generalized way. I also wanted to throw out there, astrocartography would probably be pretty fucking cool and pretty helpful with this as well. However, I am by no means very educated in that at all. So I can't provide you any specific tips, but there are wonderful astrologers out there who very much can. So feel free to explore through that avenue if that's something you're already called to, something you really like or enjoy. Or if you do already follow any astrologers that are into the astrocartography, and you can kind of take what you're learning in this episode and apply it with what they teach you or what they advise with astrocartography, and use that to explore generational patterns and healing. I'm sure it would be super cool. Now, let's talk a little bit about placements to be explored when it comes to this. Again, now that we've talked about, you can do this for specifically your family, you could do this for your lineage, for your ancestors. You can look at this from very general, just regional point of view. Now that we've kind of covered all of those areas, now I want to give you some specifics. Once you've kind of decided or pulled some charts, now I want to give you some specific areas that you can take a look at. First of all, the big three. It's a wonderful home base to start, especially if you're kind of new to synastry or you're new to comparing multiple charts. Start with the big three. You can pull charts that layer them together. So you can pull compatibility or synastry charts. Like, you put in your birth chart information and you put in your mom's. Again, this goes into a synastry calculator, and what it will pull up for you are the two charts, one right on top of each other. I personally find this really helpful because I've practiced with this a lot. I can see that and I can decode it. It takes practice to do that. And so if that feels really overwhelming, my tip for beginners is to compare charts side by side at first. And this is where sometimes either screenshots on your phone or multiple tabs on your internet browser can be the most helpful, so that you can like swap windows quickly back and forth, or you can even pull up pictures side by side of two different charts right next to each other. Sometimes that is a much easier way to get started in synastry before you actually use the synastry calculators that are going to put the charts right on top of each other. If you are interested in learning more about synastry from like a general level, I already have an episode on that. I'm not going to go into those details today. That's also in the show notes below if you need to learn or would like to learn a little bit more about those basics as well, okay? Now, once you've got the two charts, whether you're looking at them as a compatibility, right? Or it's called, I believe they're called a bilateral chart. I always forget what they're called from a technical term. Whether they're the right on top of each other or whether you're looking at side-by-side images, here are some specific places you can start looking. I would start with the big three: the sun, the moon, and the rising sign of the charts that you are comparing. If you need a reminder of what the sun, the moon, and the rising all represent, go back to your beginning astrological studies for that. Maybe you've taken level 1 astrology with me, that witch next door. Maybe you haven't done that yet and you're looking for a really awesome birth chart course. You should go take my course. You can also find that in the show notes below. It's been so helpful for so many of our neighbors here. I've had so many people reach out ever since that course launched that they are finally making sense of their chart and able to start really applying what we're talking about on the show, like in Moon Day Musings and the forecast and stuff with their actual chart, which is just so, so cool. So if you did take level 1 astrology, you can definitely go back to the beginning of that course and refresh yourself on the moon, the sun, and the rising sign. These are 3 prominent energies that very naturally exert themselves. And so it's just a great way to just get a good overview of kind of the vibe of that person or that day or that, what was going on at that time. Okay, so it's a great, great place to start. Compare and contrast that. What does the big 3 look like in one chart compared to the other? How are those different from one another? How are they similar to one another? What about the houses that they're each in? Is the sun in a totally different house in one chart than the other chart? Remember, if the sun is in the upper hemisphere, the top half of the chart, that's considered a daytime chart. And it is usually concerned with daytime external themes and lessons that it experiences. Whereas if the sun is on the bottom half of the chart, the bottom hemisphere, this is called a nighttime chart. And it's going to deal with those darker, interpersonal, inner world themes and lessons and experiences. Okay, so that's a great compare and contrast right off of the bat. The rising sign is a great place to start because the rising sign, especially if you're going to be using the Placidus house system, the rising sign calculates all of the house placements. So that's going to really change and define the structure of each of the charts. So comparing the rising signs plus whatever planet rules the rising sign is the ruling planet of that whole chart. It's called the chart ruler. So this is exactly why it's never a bad idea to just start right at the home base with the big 3. And then the moon, to top that all off, the moon is going to be our feelings, how things were feeling at that time, right? Houses to take a look at. You could really, I don't want you to limit yourself to these houses. I just wanted to give you some direction if you're looking for houses to start looking in. Definitely, these are all my suggestions. And I will still say, even as your astrology instructor, this is not the end all be all way. This is just guidance. It's just a jumping off point for you. Let the charts speak to you. Let the houses and placements jump out to you as you're comparing and contrasting, okay? But if you're needing direction, you can use these suggestions. So for houses, that would be 4th house and 12th house. 4th house is marked and it's begun by our IC, the bottom-most angle in the chart, that line that goes straight all the way down bottom center. That is the IC, the Imum. I always say this wrong, Imum Coeli. And this is our root, where we come from. So a lot of generational exploration is in our 4th house, where we come from, our ancestors, our lineage, what we consider to be home, how our caregivers raised us. The 4th house, when we think of like in a big conceptual way, where we come from, not just like literally your own mother's womb, but far beyond that. That's 4th house stuff. Then you got the 12th house, house of the unseen, house of the unconscious, house of our subconscious. They say in the 12th house, when we venture through there, we can access our other lives. So we definitely have a generational portal here. Very, very much so. So much of our generational patterning is imprinted on our subconscious. So if the door to our subconscious is in our 12th house, this is definitely going to be a good place to explore. As far as a couple of placements or planets to take a look at, I went with Saturn and Chiron. I could make the argument, as I'm sure you're well aware, I could make the argument for every single planet. And every single celestial has a benefit from a generational standpoint. And you could look at the Mercury placements. You really could find so much information from any of them. But two of the biggest characters and teachers when it comes to generational patterns and generational healing are definitely going to be Saturn and Chiron. Saturn is our teacher. Saturn is the parent or the teacher of the chart. There is very, very much this aspect of taking what I've learned, taking my experience, and passing it down. And so this is why Saturn has been called the father in the chart. Some people say Saturn straight up represents your dad. I don't think it's that simple. How convenient would it be, though, if it was? If it was that simple, but it's not. But I do think our relationship with authority, I do think that our upbringing when it comes to how we learned boundaries and discipline and willpower and restriction and discipline, all of these things very, very much come from our Saturn, which is why our Saturn return is such a big one, right? Why we talk about this so much, because it is very much known to be a karmic planet. So lots of generational exploration. If you want to take a look at and compare and contrast Saturn, whether that's the Saturn placements of you and your family, looking at what Saturn was doing at a specific time in history, etc. Don't be afraid to venture through generational healing through just Saturn alone. Trust me, you will learn so much. And then Chiron. Chiron is our wounded healer. Chiron literally represents our trauma and therefore our healed and gained wisdom from experiencing that trauma. It is the hardship and straight up fucking tragedy that we cannot escape in any life. Chiron represents that. It says no one gets out without it. No one gets into this life and out of this life without it. Everyone experiences trauma and tragedy, and therefore everyone has the opportunity to learn from it and become so much wiser in spite of it. That's what Chiron's mythology and story teaches us in the astrological chart. So I hope that this is giving you a good place to start. I think that a lot of us are really interested in doing this. You've probably listened to the show and heard me talk about different placements, my different family members' charts and things like that. And been really interested in doing this for yourself. I really wanted this to be a super informative episode to help you get started. Like I said, more so than me giving you reflections on the generations themselves. Maybe that'll be next episode, but I really wanted to give you more context and reference first, and resources first, so that you could get started doing this for yourself. Because I think that most astrologers give you their interpretation kind of only. And I think that that can be really helpful. Trust me, one of the things I love listening to are other astrologers on podcast episodes or reading their articles or like blog articles or watching their lives on Instagram talk about their views on the generations through the planets. Absolutely. It's so fascinating to me. And I want to see more astrologers giving those tools out. This is how I got to this interpretation, because these are the parts of the chart that I explored. These are the charts I'm pulling. This is why I pulled them. And so I wanted to give you all that first. So this wasn't a super me giving you a reading much on this episode as it was me handing you, hopefully, a helpful tool bag. So do not hesitate to reach out with any questions after this episode, especially if you're a full-time student in that which school you're on Mighty Networks. You can comment in Mighty Networks and let me know if you had any additional questions, or if you get started in doing this for yourself and you want some help, or you want to do this with some of your fellow students as well. That is a wonderful, safe, and magical place to do that in the Mighty Networks community. I really enjoyed this today. So thank you for your time. I hope that this was helpful for you. I'm just right next door. If there's anything else that you need to get started in this journey, I'm very excited for you, though. Like I said, this is something that I I love using astrology for this. And I'm excited to dig into it more with all of you. Like I said, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about what Pluto and the other outer planets do look like for these generations and kind of my personal take on that with all of you. That'll be a lot of fun. Maybe we'll do that next week. All right, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for spending time with me today. Let me know if there's anything else you need. I hope that this was a good time for you, as it was for me. I hope that you get to have a lovely, lovely rest of your week this week. And I hope that you all stay safe, have some fun, and stay magical out there. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed That Witch podcast today, I would be super, super grateful if you would take a moment to head over to Apple or Spotify and leave a rating and review. It really helps to support the show. Or if you just have a friend that you think would enjoy what we're doing, what we're talking about here, you can just share the show with them as well. Now, if you yourself like what you're doing here and you want to get more into the magic of the neighborhood, I highly recommend checking out my monthly membership, That Witch School. It's kind of like a witchier, more interactive style of Patreon subscription where you can enroll at a tier level that fits your lifestyle and budget. You can get instant access to all of the bonus content that we've already done, as well as all of the future amazing to come bonus content that we'll be doing in the future together. There's exercises for strengthening your intuition. There are loads of resources for studying astrology and learning your birth chart. We've got guest workshops, bonus episodes, exclusive discounts, and so much more. My full-time students also get exclusive access to Mighty Networks, our private online community platform, which is basically like a way better and way more magical social media platform with a bunch of really cool people like you that just want to learn from and support one another on this witchy spiritual journey. If this sounds like something that you would really enjoy, head over to thatwitchnextdoor.com/enroll and explore the tier level of That Witch School that would fit you today. Now, if you have any questions after the episode today, any inquiries, show suggestions, anything you'd like to share with me, you can head over to thatwitchnextdoor.com/conjurethatwitch. Remember, I'm just always right next door. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next episode.